Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And on the line with us is Dave Zirin, the sports editor for The Nation magazine, host of the Edge of Sports podcast, edgeofsports.com for the podcast, thenation.com, of course, for his writing. You can tweet him at Edge of Sports or at The Nation. Is that all? Do I have everything right here, Dave?
Yeah, you got it all down, Thom. Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks so much for joining us. It's been a while since we've talked, and I always learn a lot from you. I'm sports illiterate, and this piece that you wrote for the Nation, taking a knee is not about abstract unity, but about racial justice. I've been thinking, and in fact, we've been talking about this on the radio for the last couple of weeks, that the Trump managed to completely change the conversation away from police violence against black people, which was Kaepernick's original, protest, to some weird, abstract Fox News bumper sticker.
Well, I mean, I might describe it more as a CNN bumper sticker.
Yeah.
And I will put, and I'll tell you, I want to explain why in a second. And part of this is that I also put far more of the blame on this, less on Trump than on the ownership of the National Football League. Because Donald Trump, what he did with his profane, racist speech, I mean, he didn't really take it off track. What he was doing was he was trying to demonize and destroy the roughly 9 or 10 football players who were taking a knee for racial justice. And so the response could have been, this is BS, Trump. We actually are taking a stance or taking a knee to fight police violence. And you're scared to have the conversation about police violence. You're scared to acknowledge that 2017, with very little publicity, has actually seen a rise in police killings in this country. You're scared to talk about the fact that you've loosened the rules so police departments can again buy hardware from the military. You're scared to talk about this. That could have been the response to Trump's Huntsville, his profane and racist Huntsville speech. But it's really like the NFL owners who have turned this into a fight between CNN bumper stickers and Fox News bumper stickers. So it's not that Trump now basically controls the protest, if you will. It's that NFL owners have changed the terms of the debate from Trump's racism versus anti-racism and solidarity, which is what a lot of the players wanted after Trump's speech and was the motivation for a lot of players to do what they did. But it's now the sort of thing where, and I'm sure you remember this, Thom, from the start of the war on terror, the liberal bumper sticker, protest is patriotic,
right,
which to me is a very sort of like defensive slogan. You know, instead of saying, no, I'm protesting because I hate this war, you're saying almost like I'm protesting because I want to exercise my rights, which doesn't really explain to people why you're protesting.
Right. And that's my point. That's been
patriotic versus Trump's, which is like, stand for the flag, or as his one of his church advisors said, or you could be shot in the head. You know, it's like the violence in response to the sort of protest is patriotic thing. But as you're saying, Thom, and I'll end with this point, what gets lost in that morass is the original intent of what Kaepernick and others were trying to push for.
Yeah. And we need to revive it. We need to bring it back. But it's, I mean, the media is creating their narratives, and they go for the narrative that is what my take on this is that basically since the death of the Fairness Doctrine and the massive media consolidation following the 1996 Telecommunications Act, is that when talking about news, and in this case we're talking about news in the context of sports, but still news. When talking about news, our infotainment media typically goes for either sports, in other words, who's ahead, who's behind, who's winning, who's losing, or drama. Whose feelings are hurt, who's angry with whom, who's on the inside, who's on the outside. Is Mitch McConnell happy with Paul Ryan? Instead of details, instead of facts, instead of information, it's a fact-free zone. And so they zeroed in on the conflict between Trump and the players, and then the potential conflict between the players and the owners, and then the owner, and then Jerry Jones got involved in it. So it all became drama. But it's fact-free drama, and that's a terrible, terrible thing.
Yeah, and that's right. And that's how you had the bizarre spectacle of this past week of people like Terry Bradshaw, the former NFL quarterback, and Jimmy Johnson, another kind of good old boy football announcer who even played for a segregated team at Arkansas. two older white guys from the South who were more cogent and clear about why these protests were happening Sunday morning on the pregame show, and more, I would argue, withering towards Donald Trump than Anderson Cooper and his town hall meeting was on Tuesday night on CNN, which was called something like Patriotism, Sports, and blah, 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 and the anthem. Not even the phrase police brutality, racism, or anything. It was called Patriotism, Protest, and the President, or something like that. So again, like front-loading Trump in a way that I think does us all a collective disservice. And when Terry Bradshaw is better than you at reporting the news, we have a serious problem. It speaks to this, because that's because Sunday morning the ideology hadn't been set in stone yet. It was still confusion. There was still anger. Right. It was still NFL and NBA players largely tweeting their rage at Trump for what he said, and it hadn't settled yet. The NFL owners and Roger Goodell had yet to sort of grab a hold of this and turn it into what they've turned it into, which is effectively more nationalism and more patriotism, which, if this wasn't so serious, Tom, I would be laughing my butt off, because it's like the NFL could take anything and just turn it into more nationalism. Right. It's unbelievable.
Well, and they've been paid by the Pentagon to do that since 2008 or 9.
Yeah, true, which was discovered by Jeff Flake and John McCain, of all people, who then criticized it. I mean, this is how far through the looking glass we are.
Yeah, it's very strange. There's one other piece to this that I wanted to ask you about. I figured if anybody would know, it would be you, Dave. We're talking with Dave Zirin, the sports editor for the Nation magazine and the host of the podcast Edge of Sports, edgeofsports.com and thenation.com. And that is the article that I've got in front of me about this is by Joe Avella in Business Insider, but I saw numerous ones this morning when I was searching on it. And that was that back in the 80s, you had the United States Football League, and they played in the spring, and the NFL played in the fall, and Trump bought one of the teams and said, if God wanted, and I'm quoting from this article, this is supposed to be a quote from Trump, if God wanted spring football, he wouldn't have invented baseball. And so he buys into this team, and then in the 4th year of the USFL, they announced that they were going to shift to the fall and go up against the NFL. What came out of this was a lawsuit, a $1.5 billion lawsuit by Donald Trump against the NFL, which he won, and the court awarded him $1 plus triple damages, so it was $3. It
went up to $3,
right?
Yeah,
plus 27 cents in interest. And but basically, he got banned from the NFL for life. I mean, how much of this is just payback because he's PO'd at the NFL?
Well, and actually, there's an even fresher wound than that, Tom, is that 3 years ago, Donald Trump wanted to buy the Buffalo Bills. And it was decided by the National Football League Ownership Club, which is an exclusive club of billionaires, of course, that Donald Trump was too tacky and his financials were too, frankly, weird, just debt-ridden and all the rest of it, that they did not want him in their club. The same way they said to Rush Limbaugh they didn't want him in their club when Limbaugh attempted to buy the St. Louis Rams, because even though a lot of guys are hyper-conservative and huge bankrollers of the GOP, they're also the kind of people who do their business in shadows, and people like Trump and Limbaugh are clowns to them. They're court jesters to them. They're not people to be taken seriously. But then, of course, when Trump was going to become president, well, now we're talking tax cuts, and you better take that seriously if you're a billionaire. And so they gave him millions of dollars. Right. And yet but as you say, and I think this is absolutely true, that resentment still exists. And one of the reasons the owners stepped into this fray wasn't just because they wanted, I would argue that this sort of like capturing of the protest and turning it into rank nationalism is just the byproduct of what the NFL does with everything. But one of the reasons that the NFL owners, I would argue, stepped into this is that they don't like someone like Donald Trump telling them what to do. And so when you have Donald Trump saying you should fire these players and that the game has gotten too soft and, really just clamoring for more brain injuries, I mean, I think that truly pissed the NFL ownership fraternity off.
Yeah,
like we're not going to be pushed around
with severe justification. So Dave, we're just about going to hit a break here. Where does this go?
That's a $9 trillion question.
Yeah.
I have no idea where this goes. I think it's been very, very co-opted at this point, but that doesn't mean that there's not still a fight to be waged as to where this should go. I think a lot of where it goes, if it goes in a better direction, is going to depend on what happens in the streets. This Saturday in D.C., there's something called the March for Racial Justice. I think if people go to that, they're more likely to change this narrative than just tweeting about it.
Yeah, great. And you know, if people are interacting with media to the extent that they can, you know, encourage media to start talking about the reason for these players taking the knee. Dave Zirin. Dave, thanks so much for being with us today.
No, thank you so much, Tom.
Great talking with you. We'll be back.